October 23, 1987, Medellín, Colombia. 16-year-old Carlos Mendoza had 47 pesos in his pocket and a choice that would echo through 3 decades. Pablo Escobar's lieutenant dropped $5,000 on the boy's fruit stand. Blood money. Payment for silence about the safe house across the street. Carlos looked at more cash than his family would see in 5 years. Then he shoved it back. "I don't want your dirty money." Every vendor on that block went silent. You didn't say no to Pablo. Not if you wanted to see tomorrow. But what happened next wasn't what anyone expected. Escobar didn't order the boy killed. He didn't burn down the stand. Instead, he smiled, walked away, and made a phone call. That phone call changed everything. Not just for Carlos, not just for his family, but for every person who thought they understood the difference between right and wrong in Pablo Escobar's Colombia. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone booth stood like a confession box on the corner of Avenida Oriental, its glass panels reflecting the amber glow of streetlights that barely penetrated Medellin's perpetual haze. Pablo slipped inside, his white guayabera unstained by the blood that had painted his afternoon. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "Hermano, I found one." The voice on the other end crackled through static. "Found what?" "A boy with principles." Pablo watched Carlos through the glass, the teenager's hands trembling as he counted his pathetic earnings. "You know how rare that is in our business. Pablo, what are you—" "Listen to me carefully. I want you to make some calls. This boy, Carlos Mendoza, he has a sister, Elena, 12 years old, walks to school every morning past the cathedral. Their mother works double shifts at the textile factory on Calle 10. The line went quiet except for the distant sound of musica tropical bleeding through a nearby radio. "You want me to touch the family?" No, no, no. Pablo's laugh held no warmth. "I want you to protect them. Every day, every night. Make sure nothing happens to them. Nothing at all." "I don't understand." Pablo pulled out a cigarette, American-made, and struck a match against the booth's metal frame. "The boy thinks he's a hero, yes? Thinks he can stand up to evil and walk away clean. So let him. Let him be pure." Across the street, Carlos was packing his unsold mangoes into wooden crates, his movements sharp with the adrenaline that comes after surviving the impossible. A group of neighborhood kids had gathered, their eyes wide with the kind of awe usually reserved for saints or madmen. "But here's the beautiful part," Pablo continued, smoke curling around his words. "Tomorrow I'm going to offer him something better than money. I'm going to offer him a job. Working for us? Working against us." Pablo's smile widened. "The DEA has been sniffing around, looking for young eyes and ears. Someone clean, someone nobody would suspect. What if we give them exactly what they want?" The pieces clicked into place on the other end of the line. "You want to flip him. I want to create him. This boy, this Carlos with his precious morals. He's going to become our greatest asset precisely because he believes he's our enemy." Pablo dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his leather shoe. Every piece of information he thinks he's stealing from us, every safe house he believes he's compromising, every move he makes, it will be exactly what we want him to do. And his family? Protected, always. That's the leash, hermano. He stays loyal to his American handlers because he knows his mother and sister are safe. He never questions why they're so safe, and he never realizes that every victory he hands the DEA leads them further from the truth. Through the phone booth's glass, Pablo watched as an older man approached Carlos's stand. Even from this distance, he could see the practiced casualness of the man's movements, the way his eyes cataloged exits and threats. American. Military bearing poorly disguised as civilian clothes, right on schedule. Pablo had made the anonymous tip to the DEA 3 hours ago, suggesting they might find valuable intelligence from the street vendors in this particular barrio. He'd painted Carlos as a potential asset, a clean kid with no criminal connections, perfectly positioned to observe the safe house operations. "The American is here," Pablo whispered into the phone. "Carlos doesn't know it yet, but he's about to be recruited by the same people who think they're hunting me. What if he refuses? He won't, because tomorrow I'm going to give him a reason to hate us even more than he already does. Something personal, something that makes cooperation with the Americans feel like justice instead of betrayal." Pablo hung up and stepped out of the booth, straightening his guayabera. The evening air tasted of diesel fumes and desperation, flavors as familiar as his mother's cooking. He walked slowly past Carlos's stand, close enough to hear the teenager's rapid breathing, close enough to smell the fear sweat that had replaced his earlier bravado. "Buenas noches, Carlos," he said softly. The boy's head snapped up, his dark eyes wide with terror and defiance in equal measure. "Tomorrow," Pablo continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "you're going to understand that refusing my money was the easy choice. The hard choices are coming." He kept walking, not looking back as the American agent approached Carlos's stand with the careful stride of a predator who believed he was saving prey. 35 years later, in a small cafe in Miami's Little Havana, a man named Miguel Cardenas would wake from the same nightmare he'd carried since 1987, the sound of a phone ringing in the darkness, and a voice telling him that his teenage asset had been found in an alley with 3 bullets in his chest. But Miguel never knew about the phone booth conversation. He never knew that Carlos's death had been choreographed from the moment the boy pushed away those blood-stained bills. Some truths stay buried until someone decides to dig them up. Ready to discover what Miguel Cardenas has been hiding in his Miami cafe? Make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's chapter reveals the secret that's been haunting him for 35 years and why someone is finally ready to make him pay. The nightmare always ended the same way, with the sound of rain on a tin roof and the taste of Colombian coffee turned cold. Miguel Cardenas jerked awake in the pre-dawn darkness of his Miami apartment, his sheets soaked with the kind of sweat that comes from running through memories you can never outpace. The digital clock beside his bed glowed 4:47 a.m., same as always. His body had developed its own alarm system, calibrated to guilt and regret. He sat on the edge of the bed, feet touching the cool terrazzo floor that reminded him too much of the safe house floors in Medellín. 35 years, and he still woke to phantom phone calls that delivered news about boys with 3 bullets in their chest. Boys who trusted him. Boys who died because of that trust. Carlos. Miguel pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars, a useless ritual he'd performed every morning since 1987. The boy's face materialized anyway, those dark eyes that had looked up at him with such desperate hope when Miguel first approached his fruit stand. "I can help you get justice," he'd promised. "I can help you make them pay." The lies came so easily when you believed they were for the greater good. The apartment around him reflected the careful emptiness of a man who'd learned not to accumulate too much. A few pieces of furniture, some books in Spanish and English, photographs strategically absent. The only personal touch was a small Virgin of Guadalupe candle on the kitchen counter, something Elena had given him years ago without knowing why he needed the prayers. Elena, Carlos's sister, the 12-year-old girl who'd grown into a woman while Miguel watched from the careful distance of a guardian angel with blood on his wings. She lived in Hialeah now, married to a good man named Roberto, who installed air conditioning units and never asked why a cafe owner helped pay for their daughter Sophia's piano lessons. Elena probably thought Miguel was just another lonely immigrant who'd adopted their family out of kindness. She had no idea her kindly benefactor was the man who'd gotten her brother killed. Miguel shuffled to his kitchen and went through the motions of morning coffee. Colombian beans, always, ground fresh each day in a ritual of remembrance and penance. The aroma filled the small space, rich and dark as the secrets he carried. Through his window, Little Havana was beginning to stir. Delivery trucks rumbled down 8th Street, their engines mixing with the distant sound of dominoes clicking on cafe tables where old men gathered to argue about baseball and politics and the countries they'd left behind. His Cafe Esperanza, sat 3 blocks away, waiting for him like a confessional he entered every day. Hope, that's what Esperanza meant, though Miguel had long ago stopped believing in hope as anything more than a marketing tool for selling coffee and croquetas to homesick exiles. Still, the cafe served its purpose. It was clean money, legitimate income that let him wire transfer funds to Elena's account every month without raising questions. Blood money laundered through the honest work of serving coffee, and watching over people who reminded him of the family he'd destroyed. The shower water ran hot, but Miguel kept it just cool enough to maintain the discomfort. Penance had to hurt, or it wasn't penance. He dressed carefully, pressed, khakis, a guayabera that had never seen blood, leather shoes that had walked American streets for decades without stepping over bodies. The costume of a man who'd reinvented himself as harmless, helpful, forgettable. At 6:30 a.m., he walked the familiar route to his cafe, past the Domino Park where early risers were already setting up tables, past the mural of José Martí that someone had tagged with fresh graffiti in the night. The morning air carried the scent of café cubano and frying plantains, sounds and smells that should have been comforting, but only reminded him of other mornings and other places where he'd walked with purpose that had ultimately led to a boy's death. The cafe's keys felt heavy in his hand as he unlocked the door, disabled the alarm, turned on lights that revealed the shrine he'd built to ordinary life. 20 tables, each one precisely positioned, a counter that gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that suggested either pride or obsession. Behind the register, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, a small photograph of a young girl in a school uniform, Elena at 12, taken the month after Carlos died, the only picture Miguel allowed himself to keep. He fired up the espresso machine, its familiar hiss and gurgle filling the silence. In 2 hours, the regulars would start arriving. Mrs. Gutierrez, who ordered the same cortadito every morning at 8:15, the construction crew that bought coffee and pastelitos before heading to whatever job would exhaust them by sunset, Elena herself, who sometimes stopped by on Thursdays after grocery shopping, never knowing she was visiting the scene of her brother's true murder. Miguel had built this life deliberately, carefully, like a stage set designed to contain his guilt. But as he arranged pastries in the display case and counted the register, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching the performance, taking notes, waiting for the right moment to drop the curtain and reveal what lay beneath his carefully constructed normalcy. Some truths, he'd learned, have their own timeline for surfacing. The manila envelope was waiting when Miguel turned from the pastry case, propped against the espresso machine like a patient customer who'd arrived before opening hours. His blood turned to ice water. In 35 years of opening this cafe, no one had ever been inside before him. The alarm had been set, the locks had been engaged, the windows showed no signs of forced entry, yet there it sat, cream-colored paper unmarked except for his name written in careful block letters, Miguel Cardenas. His hands trembled as he reached for it, the same tremor that had plagued him the morning he'd identified Carlos's body in that Medellín morgue. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, weighted with the density of secrets finally demanding to be acknowledged. Inside, a single photograph fell onto the counter with the whisper of inevitability. Carlos alive. Not the boy Miguel remembered, but a man in his 50s with silver threading through black hair and eyes that had learned cruelty the way other people learned languages. He stood in what appeared to be a warehouse, expensive suit perfectly tailored, flanked by men whose postures suggested violence was their primary profession. But it was unmistakably Carlos. The same proud cheekbones, the same defiant tilt of the chin that had once refused Pablo Escobar's blood money. Miguel's legs nearly buckled. He gripped the counter's edge, his carefully constructed world tilting off its axis. Carlos was supposed to be dead, had been dead. Miguel had seen the body, had watched Elena weep over a coffin, had carried the guilt of that death for 35 years like a stone in his chest. Beneath the photograph, a note in the same careful handwriting, Thursday. Bayfront Park, 3 p.m. Come alone, or Elena's daughter pays for your lies. The paper crumpled in Miguel's fist before he realized he was crushing it. Sophia. Elena's 15-year-old daughter with her mother's kind eyes and her uncle's stubborn spirit. The girl Miguel had watched grow up from a distance, the one person in this world who represented something pure and untainted by his failures. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello? His voice cracked like a teenager's. Miguel. The voice carried a Colombian accent softened by decades but still unmistakable. Still Carlos. You sound surprised to hear from a dead man. The espresso machine hissed behind him, its automated cycle continuing as if the universe hadn't just rearranged itself around this impossible conversation. Carlos. The name felt foreign on his tongue after years of only speaking it to confessors and nightmares. How? How am I alive? That's the wrong question, hermano. The word brother dripped with venom. The right question is why you've been playing house with my sister's life while thinking you killed me. Miguel sank onto a stool behind the counter, the photograph swimming in his vision. I saw your body. I identified. You saw what Pablo wanted you to see, what I needed you to see. Carlos's laugh held no warmth, only the bitter satisfaction of a magic trick performed flawlessly for decades. Did you really think Pablo Escobar, the most paranoid man in Colombia, would kill his most valuable asset over street theater? Asset? The word scraped Miguel's throat raw. I was never your informant, Miguel. I was his. Every piece of intelligence I fed you, every safe house location, every operation I helped you discover, it all came from Pablo. You thought you were using me to hunt him, but he was using both of us to hunt your people. The cafe's walls seemed to close in, the familiar space transforming into a trap Miguel had built around himself with 35 years of meticulous routine. That's impossible. You refused his money. You stood up to him. I refused his money because he told me to refuse it, because he needed you to see a boy with principles, someone clean you could recruit without suspicion. Carlos's voice carried the weight of a confession that had festered for decades. Every DEA agent who died in those raids, every operation that went wrong, every Colombian police officer who walked into an ambush, their blood is on your hands, Miguel, but it's on mine too. Miguel's vision blurred. He thought of Agent Morrison, gunned down in a safe house Carlos had located. Officer Ramirez killed in what should have been a routine arrest. 12 good people dead because Miguel had trusted a boy with honest eyes and righteous anger. Why? The question emerged as barely a whisper. Why are you telling me this now? Because Pablo's been dead 28 years, and I'm tired of being his ghost. Because I've built something bigger than his empire ever was, and I need the past cleaned up. A pause filled with menace. And because my niece deserves to know who really killed her uncle. The line went dead, leaving Miguel alone with the photograph and the ruins of everything he'd believed about his own guilt. He'd thought his sin was getting Carlos killed. The truth was infinitely worse. He'd helped turn the boy into something that made Pablo Escobar look like a street corner dealer. And now that monster wanted to meet. Miguel stared at the silent phone for 20 minutes before his paralyzed hands finally moved to dial Elena's number. The rings stretched like torture, each one confirming his worst fears until her voicemail picked up, her cheerful voice asking callers to leave a message for the Herrera family. He tried Sophia's cell, straight to voicemail. Roberto's work number rang until a dispatcher answered with bored efficiency. RNR Air Conditioning. This is Miguel Cardenas. I need to speak with Roberto Herrera. It's urgent. Roberto? He's on a job site in Kendall. Want me to radio him? Yes. Tell him to call me immediately. It's about his family. Miguel hung up and began pacing the cafe's narrow space between counter and tables, his mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Carlos wasn't dead. Carlos had never been dead. 35 years of guilt. 35 years of secret support, 35 years of carefully constructed penance, all built on a lie that had protected a monster. The bell above the door chimed. Miguel spun around, heart hammering, but it was only Mrs. Gutierrez with her Thursday morning shopping bags. Buenos dias, Miguel. You look pale, mijo. ¿Estás bien? He forced his voice to steady. Just tired, senora. The usual? She nodded, settling into her customary table by the window, while Miguel's hands shook through the familiar routine of preparing her cortadito. The normalcy felt obscene. How could he steam milk and measure sugar when Sophia might be? He couldn't finish the thought. His phone buzzed. Roberto. Miguel? What's wrong? Is Elena? Where is your family, Roberto? Miguel gripped the phone like a lifeline. Where are Elena and Sophia? Elena's at work. Sophia should be at school. Miguel, you're scaring me. What's happened? Call Elena. Now. Then call Sophia's school. Make sure they're where they're supposed to be. Jesus Christ, Miguel. What's going on? Just do it. Call me back. Miguel ended the call and tried to think through the static of panic. If Carlos wanted him to suffer, if this was revenge 35 years in the making, then everything Miguel cared about would be a target. But Carlos had been specific, Elena's daughter, not Elena herself. Why Sofia? Because Sofia was innocent. Because she represented the future Miguel had tried to protect while drowning in the past. Because hurting her would destroy not just Elena, but Miguel's carefully maintained fiction that his money, his watchfulness, his patronage had kept the family safe. Mrs. Gutierrez was saying something about her grandson's graduation, her voice a pleasant murmur that felt like it was coming from another dimension. Miguel nodded and smiled in what he hoped were appropriate places, while his mind dissected every moment of the past week. Had he been followed? Had someone been watching the cafe, cataloging his routines, identifying his weaknesses? Construction crew arrived at their usual time, 5 men in work clothes who bantered in rapid Spanish, while Miguel served coffee and pastries on autopilot. One of them, Tomas, who'd been coming here for 3 years, started to ask about Miguel's weekend plans, then stopped mid-sentence. "Cono, Miguel, you look like you've seen a ghost." The words hit like a physical blow. A ghost. That's exactly what Carlos was. A specter from the past who'd been pulling strings while Miguel played puppet, believing himself guilty of the wrong crime. Miguel's phone rang. Roberto again. "Elena's fine. She's at the clinic, has patients all morning. But Sofia..." Roberto's voice tightened. "She's not at school. They said she called in sick this morning." "Did Elena call her in sick?" "That's what I asked." The secretary said it was Sofia herself who called, said she had a fever and her mother knew about it. But Elena never mentioned. "Miguel, I'm going home. Something's not right." "Roberto, listen to me carefully. Don't go home alone. Call the police. Tell them..." "Tell them what? That my daughter might be playing hooky? They'll laugh me out of the building." Miguel looked at the photograph still lying on his counter. Carlos's older face staring back at him with the patience of a predator who'd spent decades planning this moment. How could he explain to Roberto that his daughter had been taken by a dead man? That the kindly cafe owner who'd helped with Sofia's piano lessons was actually responsible for every terrible thing that was about to happen? "Trust me," Miguel said finally. "Something is very wrong. Don't face it alone." After Roberto hung up, Miguel stood in his cafe surrounded by the ordinary rhythm of morning customers, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and conversations flowing, and felt the walls of his carefully constructed life closing in. Carlos was out there, waiting in the shadows he'd inhabited for 35 years, ready to collect a debt Miguel had never known he owed, and somewhere Sofia was paying the price for sins that predated her birth. Miguel's hands moved without conscious thought, mechanically wiping down the espresso machine, while his mind fractured around the impossibility of Carlos's survival. The photograph lay on the counter like a malignant growth, contaminating everything in the cafe with its presence. Each time a customer laughed or the door chimed, Miguel's heart hammered against his ribs, expecting Carlos to materialize from the Miami heat like some fever dream made flesh. The morning regulars came and went, oblivious to the apocalypse unfolding behind Miguel's forced smile. Mrs. Gutierrez complimented the coffee. The construction crew argued about last night's baseball game. A young mother ordered a café con leche while her toddler babbled in the stroller, innocent and trusting in a way that made Miguel's chest ache. 35 years. 35 years of believing he'd failed to protect Carlos, when the truth was infinitely more obscene. He'd helped create a monster. Every dollar he'd sent to Elena, every careful act of penance, every sleepless night spent cataloging his failures, all of it built on Pablo Escobar's final, cruelest joke. His phone buzzed. A text from Roberto: "Police won't file a report until 24 hours. Going home anyway. Something's wrong." Miguel stared at the message, then at the photograph of the man who'd orchestrated 12 deaths by feeding false intelligence to a naive DEA agent who'd thought he was saving the world. Carlos hadn't just survived. He'd thrived, built something larger than Pablo's empire, while Miguel played at redemption in a Miami cafe. The door chimed again. This time, Miguel's blood turned to slush. Elena Herrera stood in the doorway, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. exhaustion etched in lines around eyes that still carried traces of the 12-year-old girl who'd wept over her brother's coffin. She clutched her purse against her chest like armor, her face pale with the specific terror of a mother whose child was missing. "Miguel," she said, her voice barely steady. "Roberto told me you called. About Sofia." The cafe suddenly felt airless. Elena approached the counter, her movements careful and deliberate, as if the wrong word might shatter whatever fragile hope she was clinging to. "Tell me what you know," she whispered. "Please." Miguel's throat constricted. How could he explain that her brother, the martyred hero of her childhood memories, was alive and had orchestrated this nightmare? That the kind cafe owner who'd helped with piano lessons was actually the architect of her family's original destruction? "Elena, He stopped, the words dissolving into ash. Behind her, the last morning customers were finishing their coffee, their mundane conversations a stark contrast to the horror unfolding 3 feet away. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Carlos's eyes, the same ones that had looked up at him with feigned trust 35 years ago. "You know something," she said. It wasn't a question. "All these years, you've been different, watching over us. The money you've sent, the way you look at me sometimes, like you're seeing someone else." Her voice cracked. "Like you're seeing my brother." Miguel gripped the counter's edge until his knuckles went white. The photograph lay between them, Carlos's mature face a testament to decades of calculated survival. "Elena, I know about Carlos." The words hit like physical blows. "I know you were there when he died. I know you've been carrying that guilt like a cross ever since." Tears began streaming down her cheeks. "But whatever happened then, whatever you think you owe us, I need you to tell me about Sofia. I need you to help me find my daughter." The weight of 35 years pressed down on Miguel's shoulders. Elena's faith in his goodness, her gratitude for his protection, her belief that he was a man haunted by failure rather than complicity, it was all about to crumble. When she learned the truth, when she understood that her beloved brother had become something monstrous and Miguel had been the instrument of his transformation, her grief would be infinite. But Sofia was out there, 15 years old and innocent, paying the price for sins she'd never committed. "Your brother," Miguel began, his voice hoarse with decades of suppressed truth. His phone erupted with sound. Both he and Elena jerked toward it as if awakening from a shared nightmare. "Answer it," Elena whispered. Miguel's hands shook as he swiped to accept the call. "Miguel?" Roberto's voice was strangled with panic. "She's gone. Sofia's gone. There's a note." Elena's face went chalk white. She gripped the counter, swaying slightly. "What does it say?" Miguel asked, though he already knew. Carlos had promised this moment, had orchestrated it with the same meticulous patience he'd once used to destroy DEA operations. "It says," Roberto's voice broke, "Tell the truth about Carlos or she dies like he should have." Elena's gasp cut through the cafe's morning tranquility like a blade. She stared at Miguel with dawning comprehension, seeing for the first time the guilt that had nothing to do with failure and everything to do with complicity. "Miguel," she whispered. "What truth?" Miguel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth sat between them like broken glass, too jagged to touch, too dangerous to ignore. Elena's eyes, Carlos's eyes, searched his face with growing desperation. "Miguel, answer me. What truth?" He turned his back to her, ostensibly to close the register, but really to buy himself seconds to find courage he'd lost 35 years ago. The photograph of Carlos seemed to burn against the counter's surface. "Your brother didn't die the way you think," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean? You identified his body. You told me—" "I lied." The words tasted like poison. Not about what I saw, but about what it meant. "Carlos isn't dead, Elena. He never was." The silence stretched until Miguel could hear Elena's breathing, sharp and shallow behind him. When he turned around, her face had drained of all color. "That's impossible. I saw him in the morgue. I buried—" "You buried someone else." Pablo's final trick. Miguel pulled the photograph from beneath the register, his hands trembling. "This arrived an hour ago." Elena stared at the image, her lips moving soundlessly as if trying to reconcile the boy she'd mourned with the man in the expensive suit. The resemblance was undeniable. The same proud jawline, the same intense eyes that had once looked at Miguel with what he'd believed was trust. But why? Elena's voice cracked. Why let me think he was dead? Why let me grieve for 35 years? Miguel felt something break inside his chest, a dam he'd spent decades building. Because Carlos was never my informant. He was Pablo's. Every piece of intelligence he fed me, every operation he helped me plan, it was all orchestrated. Pablo was using your brother to hunt DEA agents, not the other way around. Elena gripped the counter so hard her knuckles went white. No, that's not. Carlos hated Pablo. He refused his money, stood up to him, because Pablo told him to refuse it. The words came out in a rush now, 35 years of suppressed truth spilling like blood from a wound. It was all performance, Elena. Carlos was 17 and brilliant, and Pablo turned that intelligence into a weapon. Every time I thought I was protecting your brother, I was actually helping him kill my colleagues. The cafe around them seemed to fade into irrelevance. The hum of the espresso machine, the distant traffic, the normal world that no longer existed. Elena stared at the photograph with the hollow expression of someone watching their entire history rewrite itself. How many? She whispered. 12 good people. Agents, Colombian police officers. All because I trusted a boy who was playing a role. Miguel's voice broke. I thought my sin was getting Carlos killed. The truth is I helped turn him into something worse than Pablo ever was. Elena's legs buckled. She slumped onto a stool, the photograph trembling in her hands. All this time you've been sending money, watching over us, carrying this guilt. Wrong guilt. I was mourning the boy Carlos pretended to be, while the real Carlos was out there building an empire on the graves I helped him fill. Miguel's phone buzzed with another text, but he ignored it. Elena, your brother isn't just alive. According to his own words, he's become something that makes Pablo look like a street corner dealer. She looked up at him then, and Miguel saw something shatter behind her eyes, not just the myth of her martyred brother, but her faith in the possibility of redemption, of good men doing penance for past failures. Sophia, she breathed. He has Sophia. He wants to meet. Today at 3. Bayfront Park. Why now? After all these years, why? Because he's tired of being Pablo's ghost. He's built something new, something bigger, and he needs the past cleaned up. Miguel's voice turned bitter. And because hurting Sophia hurts you, which hurts me. It's the perfect revenge. Make me choose between saving an innocent girl and exposing the truth that will destroy you. Elena stared at the photograph of her brother, this stranger wearing a familiar face. He's not the same person. The Carlos I knew, the boy who gave away his food to other street children, who dreamed of buying me books. That boy died the day Pablo recruited him. What's left is something else entirely. Miguel pulled his phone from his pocket as it buzzed again. Roberto, probably with more terrible news. But Sophia is innocent. Whatever Carlos has become, whatever I helped create, she doesn't deserve to pay for it. Elena looked up at him with eyes that had aged decades in minutes. You're going to meet him. I have to. Then, I'm going with you. Elena, no. He's dangerous. He's my brother, she said, her voice carrying a steel Miguel had never heard before. And she's my daughter. Whatever Carlos has become, whatever lies we've all been living, Sophia is the only truth that matters now. Miguel nodded, understanding that Elena's world had just collapsed and reformed around a single terrible clarity. Carlos wasn't dead. Carlos wasn't a hero. And somewhere in this city he was waiting to finish a game that had been 35 years in the playing.